11 o'clock on the morning of November 11th, 1918, the guns fell silent across the Western Front as World War I ended with Germany defeated, its armies retreating, and its people facing starvation. Within months, Allied leaders gathered at the Palace of Versailles near Paris to impose a peace treaty so punitive and so humiliating that it planted seeds of resentment in Germany that would grow into another world war just 21 years later, a war that would kill more than 60 million people and transform the entire globe. The story of how World War II began is not simply about Adolf Hitler's ambitions or one nation's aggression, but about how the victors of the First War created conditions that made a Second War almost inevitable through a combination of territorial decisions that left millions of Germans stranded in foreign countries, economic demands that devastated Germany's economy, and a League of Nations so weak it could not prevent aggression when it came from Japan, Italy, or Germany itself. Understanding World War II requires examining how the Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, attempted to create a new world order based on President Woodrow Wilson's vision of national self-determination and collective security through a League of Nations that would resolve disputes through debate rather than warfare. Wilson convinced European leaders to create new nations from the ruins of the defeated Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, establishing Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Austria, Hungary, and the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia as independent countries for the first time in modern history. The creation of these nations fulfilled Wilson's promise of self-determination for peoples who had been ruled by empires, but it also created a dangerous problem. Several of these new countries contained substantial German minorities who suddenly found themselves cut off from Germany and living under foreign rule, particularly in Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland region and in western Poland around the port city of Danzig. These stranded German populations would one day provide Adolf Hitler with excuses for territorial demands that would trigger the next war. Germany itself was reduced in size, forced to surrender territory to Poland, France, Belgium, and Denmark, losing approximately 13% of its European territory and all its overseas colonies. The treaty limited Germany's army to 100,000 men, forbade it from having tanks, submarines, or an air force, and imposed massive reparations payments of 132 billion gold marks, equivalent to approximately $284 billion today, far more than Germany could afford to pay. The reparations were designed to compensate France and Britain for war damages and to cripple Germany economically so it could never again threaten its neighbors. Most damaging to German pride was Article 231 of the treaty, the so-called War Guilt Clause, which declared that Germany and its allies bore sole responsibility for causing World War I. This clause outraged Germans across the political spectrum who believed Germany had fought a defensive war, and that responsibility should be shared by all belligerent powers. The myth that Germany had not been defeated militarily, but had been betrayed by politicians who signed the armistice, the so-called stab-in-the-back legend, took root immediately and would be exploited by extremist politicians for decades. When Wilson returned to the United States expecting Congress to ratify the treaty and join his League of Nations, he faced immediate opposition from senators who feared that League membership would drag America into future European wars. The Senate rejected both the treaty and League membership, and the United States withdrew into isolationism, leaving the League of Nations without the world's most powerful economy and one of its strongest militaries. The League, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, would soon face tests it could not pass. Germany's new democratic government, the Weimar Republic, named for the city where its constitution was written, struggled from its birth to maintain order and legitimacy. The moderate Social Democrats who led the government faced attacks from both extremes, with communists attempting to start a revolution modeled on the Russian Bolsheviks, while right-wing nationalists organized paramilitary groups and attempted coups to restore authoritarian rule. Street battles between communist militias and right-wing Freikorps paramilitary units became common in German cities, creating a climate of violence and chaos that undermined faith in democratic institutions. The Weimar Constitution itself contained fatal flaws, most notably Article 48, which allowed the president to rule by emergency decree during crises, bypassing the elected Reichstag. This provision, intended to protect democracy during emergencies, would eventually be used to destroy it. The government also faced the impossible task of satisfying contradictory demands from the victorious Allies, who insisted on reparations payments, while ordinary Germans demanded the government reject the Versailles Treaty entirely, creating a situation where any government action would alienate either foreign powers or domestic voters. Political assassinations became disturbingly common, as extremists murdered moderate politicians they blamed for Germany's humiliation. In 1919, communist revolutionaries Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were murdered by Freikorps officers. In 1921, Matthias Erzberger, who had signed the armistice ending World War I, was assassinated by right-wing extremists. In 1922, Foreign Minister Walter Rathenau was murdered by ultra-nationalists who despised him both for his role in fulfilling Versailles Treaty obligations and because he was Jewish. These murders went largely unpunished, as sympathetic judges gave light sentences to right-wing killers while treating left-wing violence harshly, demonstrating that even Germany's judiciary had not fully accepted democratic values. In 1923, Germany's economy collapsed into hyperinflation, so severe that prices doubled every few days, destroying the savings of middle-class Germans and creating conditions where workers needed wheelbarrows full of worthless currency to buy bread. The hyperinflation resulted from the government printing money to pay reparations and to finance passive resistance when France and Belgium occupied the Ruhr industrial region to seize coal and steel as payment, and the economic chaos created fertile ground for extremist politicians who promised radical solutions. Among these extremists was Adolf Hitler, an Austrian-born World War I veteran who had been decorated with the Iron Cross for bravery and who settled in Munich after the war, joining a small nationalist group called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazis. Hitler proved to be a mesmerizing speaker who blamed Germany's problems on the Treaty of Versailles, on communists, and above all, on Jews, whom he claimed had betrayed Germany during the war and controlled international finance. In November 1923, Hitler and his followers attempted an armed coup in Munich, the Beer Hall Putsch, hoping to march on Berlin and seize power as Mussolini had done in Italy the previous year. The coup failed when police fired on the marchers, killing 16 Nazis, and Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in prison, though he served only 9 months. During his imprisonment, he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, in which he outlined his belief that Germany needed to expand eastward to gain Lebensraum, living space, and that the Aryan race was destined to rule over inferior peoples. Released from prison in December 1924, Hitler transformed the Nazi Party from a violent revolutionary movement into a disciplined political organization that would use democratic elections to gain power. For the next 5 years, this strategy went nowhere as Germany's economy stabilized, and extremist parties lost support. But Hitler waited for his opportunity. That opportunity arrived in October 1929, when the American stock market crashed, triggering a global economic depression that devastated Germany's economy. American banks recalled loans that had fueled Germany's recovery, unemployment soared to more than 6 million, and desperate Germans turned to extremist parties that promised radical change. The Nazi Party's support surged from 2.6% in the 1928 elections to 18.3% in 1930 and 37.3% in July 1932, making it the largest party in the Reichstag, though still short of a majority. Hitler refused to join coalition governments, preferring to wait for total power, and Germany's democratic system deadlocked as no party could form a stable government. On January 30th, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg, hoping to break the political impasse, appointed Hitler as Chancellor, head of the government, believing that conservative politicians in the cabinet could control the Nazi leader. Within weeks, Hitler had outmaneuvered his supposed controllers and established himself as dictator. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building burned down in a fire that Hitler blamed on communists, though evidence suggests the Nazis themselves may have started it. Hitler convinced Hindenburg to grant him emergency powers to combat the supposed communist threat, then used those powers to ban the Communist Party, arrest political opponents, and intimidate the Reichstag into passing the enabling act that gave Hitler dictatorial authority for 4 years. When Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the offices of President and Chancellor, proclaiming himself Führer, supreme leader, with absolute power over Germany. Hitler's first years in power focused on rebuilding Germany's economy and secretly rearming in violation of the Versailles Treaty. Massive public works projects, including the construction of the Autobahn highway system, provided jobs and reduced unemployment dramatically, while also building infrastructure useful for military mobilization. But the real key to reducing unemployment was rearmament, as Hitler spent billions on weapons, aircraft, and expanding the army, creating jobs in munitions factories and swelling military ranks. In March 1935, Hitler openly repudiated the Versailles Treaty's military restrictions, announcing that Germany had built an air force, the Luftwaffe, with 2,500 aircraft, and reintroducing conscription to expand the army to 300,000 men. Britain and France protested but took no action, setting a pattern of appeasement that would characterize their response to German aggression for the next 4 years. While Germany was rearming, aggression elsewhere tested whether the League of Nations could maintain peace. In September 1931, Japanese military forces in Manchuria, acting without authorization from Tokyo, seized control of the entire region and established a puppet state called Manchukuo. China appealed to the League of Nations, which condemned Japan's aggression and demanded withdrawal, but Japan simply walked out of the League and kept Manchuria, demonstrating that the League had no mechanism to enforce its decisions against a major power. Italy's fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini, who had ruled since 1922 and dreamed of recreating the Roman Empire, watched Japan's successful defiance of the League and decided to test it himself. In October 1935, Italian forces invaded Ethiopia, then called Abyssinia, from Italian colonies in Eritrea and Somalia. Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie appealed to the League in person, but the League's economic sanctions proved ineffective, and neither Britain nor France was willing to risk war with Italy to save Ethiopia. By May 1936, Italian forces had conquered the country, and Mussolini proclaimed it part of Italian East Africa. The League's failure to stop Japanese and Italian aggression demonstrated to Hitler that the Western democracies lacked the will to enforce international order, emboldening him to make his first territorial move. In March 1936, Hitler ordered German troops to reoccupy the Rhineland, the region of Germany along the French border that had been demilitarized under the Versailles Treaty.
On him, and it would be a quick campaign to subdue Poland. But on September 3rd, 1939, Britain declared war. France followed suit.
The operation was a bluff, as German forces had orders to withdraw immediately if France responded militarily, and Germany's army was still too weak to fight France. But France did nothing, unwilling to act without British support, and Britain saw the Rhineland as German territory that Germany had a right to control. Hitler's successful remilitarization of the Rhineland convinced him that Britain and France would not fight to maintain the Versailles system, and he began planning more ambitious territorial expansion. The Spanish Civil War, which erupted in July 1936, when General Francisco Franco launched a military rebellion against Spain's Republican government, provided Hitler an opportunity to test his new military forces while supporting a fellow right-wing authoritarian. Hitler sent the Condor Legion, a Luftwaffe unit with modern bombers and fighters, along with tanks and military advisors to support Franco's nationalists. Mussolini sent 50,000 troops and hundreds of aircraft. The Soviet Union sent military advisors and equipment to the Republicans, but Britain and France declared a policy of non-intervention that left the Republicans outgunned and outmatched. The Spanish Civil War became a proving ground for tactics and weapons that would be used in World War II, with German aircraft testing terror bombing of civilian targets, most infamously at the Basque town of Guernica in April 1937, where aerial bombardment killed approximately 1,600 civilians and destroyed most of the town. The war also demonstrated the bankruptcy of appeasement and non-intervention as policies, since Germany and Italy openly violated the non-intervention agreement they had signed, while Britain and France adhered to it strictly, ensuring Republican defeat. International volunteers, approximately 35,000 men and women from more than 50 countries, joined international brigades to fight for the Republic against fascism. But idealism and courage could not compensate for the Republic's lack of modern weapons and air support. By April 1939, Franco had won, demonstrating that German and Italian military support could defeat an enemy while Britain and France stood aside, and confirming Hitler and Mussolini in their belief that the democracies lacked the will to resist aggression.
Hitler is afforded wide-ranging police and political powers.
In March 1938, Hitler made his first move beyond Germany's borders when he forced Austria's incorporation into the German Reich, the Anschluss. Austrian Nazis had attempted coups before, but this time Hitler used the threat of invasion to force Austrian Chancellor Kurt von Schuschnigg to resign and allow German troops to enter unopposed. Austria, German-speaking but never part of Germany, was absorbed into the Reich as enthusiastic crowds greeted German soldiers in Vienna. For the first time, Hitler had erased a sovereign nation from the map, and once again, Britain and France protested but did nothing. Hitler's next target was Czechoslovakia, specifically the Sudetenland, a region along the Czech-German border where approximately 3 million ethnic Germans lived under Czech rule since the region had been separated from Austria-Hungary in 1919. Hitler encouraged Sudeten Germans to demand autonomy and threatened war if Czechoslovakia refused. The Czech government mobilized its well-equipped army and prepared to defend its territory. And for a moment, in September 1938, war seemed imminent. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, desperate to avoid war, flew to Germany 3 times to negotiate with Hitler, who promised that the Sudetenland was his last territorial demand in Europe. At a conference in Munich on September 29, 1938, with Mussolini acting as mediator, Britain and France agreed to give Hitler the Sudetenland in exchange for his promise of peace. Chamberlain returned to Britain, waiving the Munich Agreement and declaring he had achieved peace for our time, but he had actually given Hitler Czechoslovakia's fortified border defenses and shown that Britain and France would surrender rather than fight. 6 months later, in March 1939, Hitler broke his promise by seizing the rest of Czechoslovakia, sending troops into Prague and dividing the country into German-controlled protectorates. This time, Hitler had seized non-German territory, making clear that his ambitions extended beyond uniting German-speaking peoples.
Very concerned about what Adolf Hitler was up to, because you would see those great rallies in the streets of Berlin with hundreds of thousands of people marching.
And Britain and France finally realized that appeasement had failed. When Hitler demanded that Poland surrender the port city of Danzig and allow Germany a corridor across Polish territory to connect East Prussia with the rest of Germany, Britain and France guaranteed Poland's independence and promised to declare war if Germany attacked. Hitler dismissed their guarantees as bluffs and prepared for invasion, but first he needed to secure his eastern flank. The Soviet Union's Joseph Stalin, who had watched Western democracies appease Hitler while rejecting Soviet proposals for a military alliance, decided that the Soviet Union needed to buy time to prepare for eventual war with Germany. On August 23, 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union shocked the world by announcing the Nazi-Soviet Pact, a non-aggression treaty that secretly divided Poland between them and gave Stalin control of the Baltic states. With the Soviet threat neutralized, Hitler ordered the invasion of Poland to begin at dawn on September 1, 1939. At 4:45 a.m., German forces crossed the Polish border, while the Luftwaffe bombed Polish cities and airfields in attacks that overwhelmed Polish defenses within hours. Britain and France issued ultimatums demanding German withdrawal, and when Hitler ignored them, both declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, beginning World War II. World War II began not with a single cause, but with a series of failures that transformed the peace of 1918 into the War of 1939. The Treaty of Versailles created resentments and territorial disputes while imposing economic burdens that destabilized Germany and created conditions where extremist politicians could thrive. The League of Nations, designed to prevent war through collective security, proved powerless when major powers defied it, as Japan, Italy, and Germany demonstrated that aggression went unpunished. The democracies of Britain and France, traumatized by World War I's casualties and weakened by economic depression, chose appeasement over confrontation until Hitler's ambitions made war inevitable. The war also began because leaders misjudged both their opponents and their allies. Chamberlain believed Hitler's promises and thought appeasement could satisfy German grievances, failing to recognize that Hitler's goals extended far beyond revising Versailles. Hitler believed Britain and France lacked the will to fight for Poland, miscalculating that their guarantees were bluffs, as their earlier acquiescence to German expansion had been. Stalin believed the Nazi-Soviet Pact would keep the Soviet Union out of war, while Germany and the Western democracies exhausted each other, not realizing that Hitler would attack the Soviet Union less than 2 years later. The interwar period demonstrated that peace treaties impose obligations on winners as well as losers, that international organizations require enforcement mechanisms to be effective, and that appeasing aggressive dictators only encourages further aggression. The failure to address Germany's legitimate grievances about Versailles, while also failing to stop Hitler's illegal rearmament and territorial expansion, created the worst possible outcome: a Germany strong enough and resentful enough to start another war, while the democracies remained too weak and divided to stop it before catastrophe became inevitable. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more history content covering wars, revolutions, and events that shaped the modern world. Thanks for watching.